Good morning, everybody. This is Jim Ransom again with another edition of Morning Jim. It really is morning. I really do have my cup of coffee right here, and it's delicious, even if I did make it myself, which is usually no recommendation. Today, and without further ado, we'll start out with our first poem, which is going to be by Billy Collins. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Collins, he's now in his 70s, and as far as I know, he's retired to Florida, but that doesn't mean he's stopped reading his poetry. He was an only child, and he spent a lot of time writing poetry, even when he was a kid. So you might say that it's been a lifetime occupation. He was the United States Poet Laureate from 2001 to 2003, and he is one of only a few modern poets who actually made a good living from writing poetry and publishing a number of books. He's been a professor at City College of New York, among other appointments, and has done a lot of lecturing and poetry reading around the country. So I would have to say that he's one of my current favorites. And the poem I'm going to read this morning is called History Teacher. Let me find it here. Oh, yes, this is one of his books. It's entitled Sailing Alone Around the Room. Here in Topeka, we have to sort of buy whatever books by our favorite poets are available at our one and only bookstore, or else we're out of luck. Okay, here is the poem, The History Teacher. Trying to protect his students' innocence, he told them the Ice Age was really just the Chilly Age, a period of 1,000,000 years or so when everyone had to wear sweaters. And the Stone Age became the Gravel Age, named after the long driveways of the time. The Spanish Inquisition was nothing more than an outbreak of questions such as, how far is it from here to Madrid? And what do you call the matador's hat? The War of the Roses took place in a garden, and the Enola Gay dropped one tiny atom on Japan. The children would leave the classroom for the playground to torment the weak and the smart, mussing up their hair and breaking their glasses, while he gathered up his notes and walked home past flower beds and white picket fences, wondering if they would believe that soldiers in the Boer War told long, rambling stories designed to make the enemy nod off. Well, there you are. Collins is describing the difference between living in fantasy and not noticing reality. The key in this poem is the next to the last paragraph, where he describes what the students did during recess. They mussed up the hair of some of their fellow classmen and really carried on in a nasty way, the real and sometimes nasty world. Collins is one of those poets who can make a poem out of very ordinary observations of the world. And the teacher, the history teacher, was not in touch with his students or even with the world in which he lived. Speaking of ordinary observations of the world, I do have a poem of my own today. I wrote it about a year ago. Well, it will become clear when I read it what it's about. The title is People and Pack Rats. We have one near the post office, not far away, so I go by his house almost every day. It was new when it started to fill up. A cookie-cutter townhouse built in Ditto Row. First, I noticed a lot of stuff going in the front door like bundles of newspapers tied with rope or string, and then there were books in boxes. So, a journalist, maybe even a poet. An old car left the driveway for the street, and then a motorcycle camped on the side of the house. Next, the driveway filled with bed frames, the garage with machine tool parts, a saw table, and a rusted drill press. Lots of garden tools, but no garden. He did like planting grass and tilling it up again when it sprang up green and willing. I think of pack rat houses I see in the country. Massive piles of sticks and boards, dead grass, and paper waste. Once, when the quail hunting was slow and the dog was tired, I knocked one down and found at least some of the rat's treasure. Broken glass, belt buckles, beer can tabs, ribbons, and money. Yes, money. I left it for him, not knowing exactly what he was saving it for, but clearly he had to work hard for it. And I was already feeling like a thief and a housebreaker. They say it's genetic. I mean, for pack rats, the money and the hairpins. I'm not quite sure about hoarders. Maybe in the deep, dark depths of DNA and genealogy. The guy with the newspapers and rototiller, and the pack rat on the rear sere abandoned farmstead are brothers looking for inspiration, bread, or just distraction. We aren't so much different from some of the critters we observe in our wonderfully varied countryside, some of whom seem affected with the same bad habits we find among ourselves. Or maybe that is really normal behavior and the rest of us are OCD. Who knows? Okay, now it's time for a little humor. We always try to have some jokes, or let's not call them jokes, let's call them observations on humanity. And one of my most fertile sources for these kinds of observations is Dr. Herschel Stroud, who this year has reached the amazing age of 90 years, sharp as a tack, as always, and he can still play the trumpet and sing and other instruments as well. But he likes to send on stories that he gets from some of his friends. And so here's one that he reports. He says, "We had to have the garage door repaired. The repairman told us that one of our problems was that we did not have enough motor. We didn't have a large enough one on the garage door opener. I thought for a minute and said that we had the largest one made at the time, at least. It was 1/2 horsepower. He shook his head and said, "No, you need 1/4 horsepower." I responded that 1/2 was larger than 1/4, and he said, "No, it's not. 4 is larger than 2. We haven't used that repairman since. Another observer comments that he says, "I live in a semi-rural area. We recently had a new neighbor call the local city council office to request the removal of the deer crossing sign right near us on the road. The reason," he said, was, quote, "too many deers are being hit by cars out there. I don't think this is a good place for them to be crossing anymore," end quote. Well, I hope you're all awake enough to see the humor in that, because I thought it was hilarious. In fact, a lot of things about nature seem hilarious to me. I live in a fairly built-up area where there's lots of houses and a main road called 29th Street. And about 1/2 mile from where I live, 29th Street has on one side of it a modestly large shopping center. And then on the other side, there's an open lawn that hasn't been built on. I think it belongs to the city. And beyond that is a wooded park area. And I was driving down the road the other day. I saw a hen turkey, and she had at least a dozen turkey poults running around her. Tiny little things. They hadn't been hatched more than a couple weeks before, and they were behind the usual turkey hatching and growing time, but they were all just jumping around as happy as could be. And I do know from past observations that there's a flock of adult turkeys of about a dozen birds that frequent that area and walk around between the street and the woods fairly freely. They're not bothered by human habitations or occupations. And all of a sudden, that flock is going to be doubled. It'll be fun to see what kind of turkey activity we can spot out there in the coming months. Okay, one more story that really is a joke. The pedestrian light on the corner beeps when it's safe to cross the street. I was crossing with a mentally challenged coworker the other day, and she asked if I knew what the beeper was for. I explained that it signals blind people when the light is red. She was appalled, and she responded, "What on earth are blind people doing driving?" Oh, by the way, this lady is a government employee, in case you were wondering. Okay, that's it for today. It's not too late to arm yourself with a few facts, wake up to your own history, and try to figure out who you will vote for. And unlike most advice you'll get, my suggestion is that if you feel totally confused by conflicting claims, don't vote. Nobody will ever know unless you tell them. So, don't vote. Bye now. Enjoy the weather and get ready for Halloween and the full moon.